Carrying on with our economic environment, obviously, sometimes most of the times, books that require specific printing or specific paper or formats, especially children's books with a lot of color illustrations, proper binding methods, beautiful trimmings. These books are usually shipped to Korea or to Hong Kong or wherever the Far East, and it's printed there and it's shipped back. It's actually cheaper for us to print some of these books overseas than to do it ourselves, because locally it's either too expensive because we don't have that print quantities, and sometimes we don't have the skills or the machinery to actually, deal with these books and these printing jobs effectively. So we are printing overseas. Our consumers are very price sensitive. That's something that we mentioned before. Our tourism industry is very important, and that's actually an area of development. Although now after COVID, we are going to see, some real changes in the tourism environment, whereas a lot of people lost their jobs and the whole tourism industry kind of fell flat now during COVID because people couldn't travel, people couldn't fly. It's a huge revenue stream for South Africa, but luckily now with things opening up, possibly it could bounce back a little bit. But that's also an area of really that is flourishing, especially after the World Cup, our Rugby World Cup, our Soccer World Cup, all of these things, and our beautiful country, our wildlife, the safaris, everything that you can think about South Africa. It makes it a really great tourist destination, and that is something that we need to capitalize on in our books as well. Country of origin marketing. It's a whole concept where the mere basis of where the basis from where you are publishing. So, for example, it's a South African author, it's South African books, actually is the marketing in itself. Now, the problem with the economy as well is that our rand value, as you guys know, we've been declared junk status. It's terrible. So what does this really mean? It also means that our currency is not worth much. So, for trading internationally, for imports, for exports, for taxes that we need to pay for exports, etc., it really makes it difficult because our currency in itself is actually not very high. Consumerism. This is all about the development of niche markets which represent previously untapped profit, but they inhibit the attainment of economies of scale. Right, what this just basically means is, as we can't all provide everything for everyone, it sometimes helps to break it up in little niches and then specialize and only provide books and content for those specific markets. But the problem with that as well is that usually then you print in smaller quantities, and that is where the problem comes in, because then your unit cost per book that you are producing is much higher than with economies of scale. Is the more you do it, the more you print, the less it costs per copy. Right, so that's where that whole idea comes in. Over-publishing of certain book types, okay, that's also a problem. So what happens sometimes is we saturate the market. So we saturate the market with pushing a lot of cookbooks, a lot of biographies, all of these things onto the market. And a market can only, as we know, only 23% of the country's population buy books. So to us, it's really difficult if there is an oversupply of a specific kind of book. We need more genres, we need a variety of voices, we need to diversify our lists and our books and our product offering, but also diversify the target audiences that we are producing books for. Then your social environment and cultural environment, actually, it's all about, people's behavior, their attitudes, their motivations, lifestyle choices, the fact that we are a multicultural, multilingual country. All of these things apply here. And South Africa has a poor book reading and book buying culture. That is what they keep on saying. So they do publish this a lot, where they say we have a poor book and reading culture. And I wouldn't, well, at least we have one. So some people would say we have no book reading culture, which is not true. We have. Even that 23%, it shows that we have. And if you look back at things like the sales of Harry Potter books, the sales of Diary of a Wimpy Kid, the sales of 50 Shades of Grey. When you go back to those kinds of things, when that expose of President Jacob Zuma was published, all of these things actually indicate to us that people are willing to buy books. People actually do buy books. It just depends whether it's the right books, whether it's priced right, whether the link between the content and the target audience is actually facilitated, etc., etc. But if you look at us and you compare us to, for example, the other larger English language speaking markets or publishing markets like the UK and the US, yes, then we have a poor book reading and book buying culture. It's what we call illiteracy as well. And illiteracy is you have the ability to read. So it's not like you're illiterate and you cannot read. You have the ability to read, but your choice is just not to do so. So that is where we just we have a lack of motivation basically to read. And South Africa, obviously tied to that, is a high illiteracy rate. And that's just people who actually in our country can still not speak, read, or write a certain language. Now, the other problem with this as well, and this is really a social thing, is the stereotype or the image or the personality of book reading should change. Because I think due to historical reasons and political and economic reasons, there is a huge class division within our population groups in South Africa. And what then happens is they would say, yes, but we produce only books in English and Afrikaans, which is the truth. And then, in trade specifically, and that these books are mostly catered to the white elites, the people who have high incomes, the people who have great jobs, tertiary qualifications, proficient in more than one language, etc., etc. And that's the problem, because they also see it as a very isolated kind of activity as well. Amongst certain cultural groups, it's seen as offensive or being antisocial if you read, because you are excluding people around you. So there are also little cultural differences and nuances that we need to consider as well. But the personality of reading, it shouldn't just be for the white elite. It is something that we need to break down those stereotypes and be more inclusive. All right. And the majority of books are published in English. As we said, there's a very small trade market in indigenous African languages. Once again, it's not to say that it doesn't exist, but it isn't very big currently. A lot of African language speakers actually prefer to read in English and to write in English, and they buy books in English. They don't necessarily want to read in their own language. Now, once again, this is a generalization. It's not to say that all the people feel the same, but this is some of the statistics that have been gathered, is that they prefer to actually read in English because they do see it as the lingua franca, or the language, or the universal language of the world. But I do think in terms of local content and being a homegrown kind of publishing industry, it's important to represent languages on various levels, specifically in publishing as well. But there's still that debate whether one should or shouldn't. But this is actually, at the end of the day, if you go and look at the PASA reports as well, this is what we're faced with. So this is the truth currently, that we are not publishing equally in all of the languages, especially in trade. Now, there's a cultural commercial split. Publishers are always struggling because at the end of the day, they are still businesses. So they're struggling in terms of they want to be a business, they want to make money. But because we're also part of the arts industry, the media industries, there is a huge drive to have social impact, to facilitate change, to inspire people, to educate, to, do all of these creative and beautiful things. But on the other hand, we are also a company that needs to make money. So sometimes we need to say, okay, let's rather import the bestsellers from the UK and US because we know that they will sell in South Africa, than rather publishing, for example, a Setswana book or whatever it may be. So we need to know, should one publish titles that are commercially viable or publish titles that contribute to the culture of South Africa? Obviously, the best would be if there's a win-win for both sides, where you kind of have a balance between the two. But if you go and look at the lists as well, you will realize that it leans a little bit more towards profit, because at the end of the day, you have a company, you have to pay people, you have to keep on producing books, etc., etc. Now, the importation of titles, we've mentioned that in some of the other sectors as well. You guys will see that a lot of these things overlap. So sometimes it's a social as well as a political issue. Sometimes it's economic and a social issue. So these things can overlap. It's not that they're mutually exclusive, just as long as you guys understand what each of these factors or environments entail. Your political, economic, social, and technological environments entail, but do you realize that they can overlap? So the importation of titles is also a bad thing, because competition from sophisticated and developed publishing countries, they have economies of scale. They print runs are much larger, so their unit costs are lower, so they can price their books also cheaper. So, we have that problem with them, as well as some people also always believe that the UK and the US, because they're developed countries and we are still a so-called developing country or third world country, the problem that lies in that is that people usually think that books are better that are from the UK or US or Sweden or Germany or whatever, as opposed to African or South African literature, which is not always the truth, but people tend to have that idea. Once again, breaking down stereotypes of being a third world country and not having the best standard of work or content or stories available, which is not true because many of our authors have already been translated, won prizes, etc., etc. But once again, there's a huge stereotype thing there that we need to break down so that we foster a love for our homegrown talent, for our own stories and authors and publishing industry, that we are proud of them as well. And yes, another thing on the social environment is that trade publishers should also explore the selling of subsidiary rights. Don't believe that your titles are less than. Rather go out and actively pursue selling the translation works of your selling translation rights to your work, selling film rights, selling video or television series rights, actively doing that. And that all comes from having a pride and a strength in who and what we are, you know, the proudly South African thing. And then technological environment, which is very self-explanatory. We've gone through this before, but it's just to say how technology has changed or influenced or had an impact on our publishing industries, and especially trade. There are a lot of ebooks available. A lot of people would say that students would prefer to read printed copies for studying purposes, whereas a lot of people say they don't really care if it's an online or a printed book for leisure reading. There have been studies on that, but it depends. So in South Africa, still we do prefer print, but there are still a lot of developments in the digital ebook sphere. So kind of innovation in publishing would be self-publishing. You know, people can now these days do a lot of things on draft to digital, Amazon Kindle Select, all of these online platforms that give you the tools to actually make your own book and create it and publish it. But we also have self-publishing legs of publishing houses starting. We have ebooks, we have multimedia products that have games and all kinds of interesting media components within the book. We have normal ebooks, etc., etc. We have audiobooks as well. There are changes in our distribution channels. So we have the e-commerce systems. A lot of publishers have their own e-commerce system or sales channel. We have Amazon, we have Google, we have Takealot, etc., etc. Your electronic publishing is also a good thing because it revitalizes your backlist titles. So, for example, books that are still in print, they're not the new titles. They're just they're selling steadily on and on and on. And these books they go out of print, then there's a demand, we reprint. They reprint, we reprint. Those are your backlist titles. And these backlist titles, usually you had to reprint them so that they're in the market again. Now you can test backlist titles by converting them as ebooks. And if you then see that there's actually a big market for it, then you can actually consider, all right, am I going to reprint this book or not? So there are other avenues that you can also do or use with technology, obviously, and those can actually provide extra revenue streams. Ebooks can also reach your expat market, so people that are from South Africa that can speak possibly Afrikaans or any other language and now they live in the States, then they can still get access to this because now it's all possible. And your international market, once your ebooks are available on online platforms, you can select your territory. So you can say, I want my book available in Britain and in Australia and in France, etc., etc., which usually, traditionally, that was not possible. So there are really a lot of positive changes and positive influences that your best environment has on the publishing industry. We can go into more depth about this, but I really just wanted you guys to understand the basics of what the best environment is and how this influences your trade market. Other things that we can actually add to this is, for example, in your social and technological environment, streaming. Right now, these days, people are streaming series, they are streaming movies. It's so easier now. You don't just have the normal traditional programming infrastructure or whatever system where people have to wait for a program until it comes on. No, they can sit and do the streaming all the time. Gaming is also a huge thing. All of these activities and things that people do for entertainment can actually steal time away from your audience reading books, because now it's easier just to watch another season of whatever. You know, it's easy to just lie on the couch and watch a movie than actually sitting with your book. So, it becomes more difficult to actually attract readers and to get them to really love reading and interact with books. So that's also another way how publishers are now addressing this by, having these tie-ins. They have movie tie-ins, they have series tie-ins, they have game tie-ins, where we try to create more content for a very specific audience as opposed to just having a book. So those are different methods and strategies that you can look at. But yes, in terms of trade publishing, these are the best factor elements, and then I'll chat to you guys about just what trade publishing is and what it's all about. I just want you guys to look at this in your own time. All right, thank you.